I'd like to welcome you aboard this neoliberal airlines flight to net zero Energyville. I'm your captain, supply and demand. My co-pilot here, the price mechanism. We've got an interesting flight for you today. And we'll be on our way to an energy system without any ugly smokestacks before you know it. But first off, some housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded and photographed for potential stardom on the web and social media. If you've got concerns about your close-up moment, please speak to our casting director, Jane, and also Sally. They're the real stars behind the scenes today. A little PSA, folks. Please don't leave your valuables unattended in this room. There's also no food or drinks allowed inside the theatre. And the big one, smoking. It's a no-go, folks. Please go outside if you need your nicotine fix. The bathrooms are in the upper foyer, just up the road, up the hallway. Just follow the signs. Last but not least, safety first. In case of an emergency, follow the exit signs. There are emergency wardens. Please follow their instructions. They'll be the ones wearing helmets or the snazzy orange caps. Before we get underway today, folks, I'll tell you a little bit about our vessel here at Neoliberal Airlines. Thanks to our founding captains, Friedrich Hayek and Frank Knight, converting uncertainty into risk is a breeze, thanks to probabilistic calculations achieved through markets. Yep, don't worry about those weird new climate change weather patterns. It's just a new normal, and we'll have a competitive edge over our rivals, the Keynes Airlines Company, for years to come. But first, we actually have to figure out how to set our coordinates to net zero Energyville without using air traffic control at either end of this flight, as is neoliberal airlines policy. Once we've figured that out, we'll be soaring through the rarefied air of perfect competition before you know it. And I'm just getting some instructions from my co-pilots here. They're telling me we need to take some more equipment on board before we get going. As it turns out, this neoliberal airlines flight has never actually flown before without the assistance of the state. And I'm getting some more instructions here from the ground crew. We're actually having some sensor and energy issues as well. Our main thruster today in the transition from coal-fired power stations to solar and wind and battery-powered electricity is the wholesale power market. Unfortunately, this is not set to the direction of net zero Energyville, folks, but instead it is facing straight upwards towards global capital. To offset this problem, we're attempting to get our stabilizing thrusters going. Renewable energy certificates, large-scale generation certificates, which are soon going to have a timestamp on them, biodiversity offsets for those large mining and transition projects. But once this new equipment is attached and their sensors are hooked up to the cockpit, we'll be on our way to that beautiful destination of net zero Energyville. I mean, I think it's beautiful. No one's actually been there, though. Here at Neoliberal Airlines, we'd like to thank our sponsors, fossil fuels, and the ideology of boundless plenty that their historical relationship with economics has fostered. This means that once we get going, we can fly over those pesky material constraints. Yes, folks, those sacrifice zones for copper, lithium, and rare earth minerals will look just beautiful from 30,000 feet. Yes, I promise we'll be on our way and landing at cruel optimism tarmac in no time at all. No need to detour via that mess of Greek philosophy, French Cartesianism, and American Parks that is the concept of nature. Sorry, folks, I'm just getting some more news from the ground crew. Not only is our main engine pointing straight upwards, but it turns out we forgot to put wings on the plane. Apologies from this major oversight from our engineering department. They skipped the class from Thomas Hughes to discover that energy transitions are always social and cultural transitions. And they also skipped the class on how to actually get back down to Earth. So they built a plane for the 20th century social knowledge problem, not the new geo-social question that will get us back down to Earth. But the good news is that we have two experts to help us draw some blueprints for a new vessel. Maria Bargh, Te Arawa Ngāti Awa, is Professor of Politics and Maori Studies at Te Hangara Waka Victoria University in Wellington. She's a prominent researcher in Maori Studies and Politics, focusing on climate change and governance. She has an incredibly impressive CV that's in your programs and is an engaged scholar whose work has profoundly influenced community and government initiatives in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Over to you, Maria. Thanks.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi tuatahi ki ngā tangata whenua o tēnei rohe, ngā tangata Lithgow. Tēnā koutou, ki te whaia Yvonne, nāna I whakatau I a tātou I te rā, kei te mihi. Ki ngā kaiwhakahaere, Declan, Stephen, Sally, Denise, koutou katoa, kei te mihi. Huri noa ki a tātou ngā maunga, ngā awa, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everybody, lovely to be here on this flight. Really keen to have the discussions that we'll keep going on the discussions that we've been having. And I just had wanted to acknowledge the folks, the people of Lithgow and Whaia Yvonne, who had been here yesterday to welcome us, and all of the organisers for this event, and all of you in this room today who have come along with a little bit of rain and a little bit of shine to continue our conversations. Forgot the clicker. We made an agreement that we weren't going to be preparing long notes. I'll just keep clicking. I have a little overview of where the flight, for my duration, is headed. But I wanted to start here, and for those of you who attended yesterday, this picture will be familiar. It's important for us in Māori studies and Māori society to locate oneself in relation to others. And of course, Latour gets to that right at the end, down to earth. We usually start with it so that we all have a sense at the outset what our relationships are to one another. So in my case, ko hororo te maunga, pōkaitu te awa, ko Ngāti Kia, Ngāti Tuara, ngā tangata, te arawa te iwi, te arawa te waka, ko Maria tōku ingoa. So I'm from this mountain in the background here, Horohoro, the full name of which is actually Te Horohoro e ngā o ngā ringa o Kahumata Momoi, the place where a chap called Kahumata Momoi washed his hands, which sounds like an odd sort of name, but speaks to a particular history for the land. And I guess as we continue on in my different comments, the histories embodied in the land are quite important to us and lead to the values that we have around these places. So this marae is called Kiaroa. The meeting house that you can see on the left there is a representation of Kiaroa, and she was a woman and an ancestor of ours, and came on the Te Arawa Waka, one of the boats, canoes, vessels, coming to Aotearoa. Her husband is represented in the flagpole there, Ngā Toroirangi, and these will become relevant later in the talk as well. And you can't see our river, which comes round the marae here. So that's a sort of start of locating myself. I've got a map shortly as well. And this is what we would call my tūranga waiwai, a place that I have the right stand, right to participate in the political community, and also the obligations which go hand in hand with that to look after these lands, waters, the bush, and other folks, other inhabitants of that area. So in the Māori world, we have a saying, he oranga whenua, he oranga tangata. If the land is well, the people will be well, and the reverse of it as well, although I didn't put that bit, which is mā wiwi tangata, mā wiwi whenua, that if the land's sick, then the people are also going to be sick, but I'll get to that shortly. If we dwell on if the land is well and we're well, I think, many of us have, well, certainly in Aotearoa, and I've seen it in other places, inspired by this idea of having bush that is really flourishing with birds, that waterways are there and we can at least swim in the waterways, if not drink water from the waterways that we see around us, that they have room to flow, that wetlands are a soggy paradise for ducks and other species, and that what we call tangata whenua, people of the land, and tangata tiriti, people of our treaty, are in good relationship with each other and with the land as well. And that's a sort of vision that we tend to dwell on. However, but we know we've got an imbalance in our, essential relationships. And to me, that's really at the heart of the matter. And we've talked a lot about these different issues, and I don't want to dwell on them too long, because I think, we've heard a little bit about that in Lithgow and yesterday, in terms of the challenges that we're facing. And some of this, to me, does rest a lot on those assumptions, not only of superiority, but that idea of the linear progression of humanity along the different stages on that continuum. And to me, that's at the heart of some of our real challenges, that assumption. We can see challenges to this, and we heard a little bit about it yesterday, to those assumptions of the superiority of that way of looking at the world. And we know it's not universal. It has a particular localised and specific knowledge tradition, as Zoe Todd has talked about, and she was mentioned yesterday. And we're seeing the challenges to that within our universities, the numbers of, sort of explosion of numbers of books and journal articles, as well as people talking about decolonising either the university or decolonising particular disciplines, law, psychology, ecology, all of those sorts of areas, and encouraging us to engage in understanding multiple knowledge systems and traditions. When we think about the green energy transition, this is also a challenge, a shift to renewables, but staying within the planetary boundaries. We know we've already breached 6 of the 9, so how are we going to navigate and juggle that? For many Māori communities, that decision is also set in the context, and not just Māori communities, with how to put food on the table within our cost of living crisis, how to find employment, support the well-being of families, and take proper care of the land as well, how to work through those things and juggle them. And as Declan has noted in a recent piece, the idea of terrestrial politics helps shed light on the political stakes of the entrenched power of extractive industries, and that's something we'll probably dwell a bit more on soon. That's a cartoon from Lunig, which I didn't think I needed to put Lunig. You would all be familiar with it, or familiar with Lunig style. So how do we navigate through? So the sort of rest of my talk is thinking about some of those issues from a quite a specific place. And Indigenous legal traditions do have some ideas, I'd suggest, that can help us with this. Tangata whenua for us literally means people of the land, and thinking about, coming down to earth. For us, the earth is the whenua, Papatuanuku, who's in relationship with Rangi Nui, the Sky Father, and we as humans are in the middle there, between the two. So we're people of the land, but our place in the Māori worldview is the Taina species. We're the youngest of all species, so we're junior to others, and in our stories, the birds taught us how to speak, for example, which means we owe them an obligation as the junior species in this scenario. They're our tuakana, which creates a kind of a different sort of relationship. Whanaungatanga, again, relationships were talked about yesterday, refers to those kin relationships according to your whakapapa, genealogy, but also kin-like relationships, and those kin-like relationships are clearly those with those that are not human, more than human. I've got that in there, Kelly. The more than human world, but also intergenerationally, so thinking of other generations. It was interesting when we went to Lithgow, Auntie Sharon Riley talked about the kangaroo not going backwards. Well, interestingly, in the Māori worldview, we have a saying around ka muri, ka mua, that actually you're always looking backwards and walking backwards into the future, looking at the past, which is just a slightly different way of thinking about it, the intergenerational connection. Utu, again, there was some discussion yesterday about, yes, we can have the relationships, but, how do you navigate that? Utu for us acknowledges that reciprocal nature of all relationships, or at least is mostly about balance. So the obligation to sustain them in appropriate balance. So it doesn't mean things don't get imbalanced, but they must be rebalanced. Considering past harms, reciprocating gifts, good gifts and bad gifts, is all part of how to maintain that balance. So we'll all be familiar with the idea of a just transition, and in the context in Aotearoa, that often comes up for energy strategies and other climate adaptation work. But when I was thinking it through and trying to apply it in different communities, it didn't really fit. So I was looking around for something else that might be useful in our particular context, and came up with this idea of thinking, from our position, what would be the other kind of core elements? And so came up with the idea of a tika transition. And tika just means correct, or that which is right and just. But isn't just about that. It's also a nod towards what I see in our particular context as a key element, being acknowledging tikanga, Māori law, and the key principles of Māori law. And these are, there are a number of values and practices that have been adapted over time. They're not just stuck in a glass case, but are flexible and changing, as all cultures are, but are commonly overlooked in our national planning documents around climate adaptation or energy strategy. And actually, when we think about a breach of tikanga, built into this system is also a kind of disputes resolution process that Hirini Mokomead, one of our key thinkers, has talked about, where there's a particular process and procedure for rebalancing, assessing what the breach is, working out what the appropriate mechanisms will be to rebalance things, and then reaching a state of air where things are all resolved for all parties. So that's a key part of it. So here in the diagram, we have a number of the elements of tikanga. So whanaungatanga, that's about the relationships. Again, the kin and the kin-like relationships. Kaitiakitanga, which is the responsibility to look after the land and waterways. Utu's the balancing. Tapu is the spiritual nature of all things. And mana is about authority. But it also, a key part of it is acknowledging all the different forms of mana. So the ocean has mana, the land has mana, and other groups have mana. And so when thinking how do we all negotiate amongst ourselves, a key part of it is acknowledging all of the different mana and as your kind of starting point in that picture. Also key for us is Te Tiriti o Waitangi, signed in 1840, which in our view provided for these our two strands of law and politics and science to continue side by side, and really gave a bit of a blueprint for the idea of reciprocal relationships, that the British would have kāwanatanga governing over the British, and Māori would retain tino rangatiratanga, our self-determination over our lands and treasures and so on. And those ideas have been, by the courts and in other places by government, thought about as different principles now, generally, as part of our unwritten constitution. And partnership, active protection of Māori rights, and reciprocity are some of those key, this list isn't exhaustive, some of those key principles that have emerged over time. Also crucial for us is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, although the New Zealand government, along with the Australian government and Canada and the US, weren't that keen early on to support it in 2007 at the UN. We know they've now generally come around to the idea that it's a declaration and being incorporated into international law. So fundamentally, the key aspects that I think about are right of self-determination, rights around free prior informed consent, rights around being involved in development strategies and use of lands and territories, and so on, are important in thinking about it. And as a toolbox that really just gives rise to questions in each of these areas. Have the relationships been considered? Has the idea of how we're going to rebalance this particular project been considered, and so on? And so this toolbox is something I've applied recently to an offshore renewable energy enabling investment strategy document, and community groups are using it. I don't know if I mentioned that I'm sort of putting half on a slightly different hat now, Minerals Advisor, which is a volunteer role, I would note, for my hapu, Ngāti Kia, Ngāti Tuara. And as part of that role, I've been thinking about this toolbox and how to apply it to different proposals that come to us as a community. So that's just a close-up of our bluff, because it's beautiful. Here was the map, which I should have probably put in earlier. Tika Maui, the fish of Maui, and we're located, in the Bay of Plenty in the central, again, I should have done a little circle, in the middle there, is where we're located, our lands, about 10 minutes south of Rotorua, southwest of Rotorua, for those of you who are familiar with the central North Island. Actually, you can see it on the map, but it's very little. What are the energy options that we've explored as a hapu? I wanted to come back to these again as the kind of our starting point is embedded in our histories and those stories that we have and our values. But these, of course, are always needing to be balanced. But this is our starting point. So, o arero, this is our waterfall on the left, so just behind the marae. And o arero means tongue, and I'm not sure if you can quite grasp it here, but it sort of flows down like a tongue. This is one of the parts of our energy inspiration. In the 1800s, there was a flax mill located here to pound the flax to create the soft version of it to make rope, and that was part of the trade, certainly in the late 1700s even, one of our industries in Aotearoa. So this is a key part of our thinking. And then also assuming that everything has whakapapa. So I've read recently, and we've heard it many times from large mining companies, that things in the ground, minerals and other petroleum and other things in the ground have no value until they're extracted. Well, our starting point is that there's a whakapapa, there's a genealogy for all of those things. Lithium's actually not on this one, but all minerals have a relationship. And so you can see here that, again, the genealogies for things like minerals aren't, they're in relationship with other things, if you like, other aspects of the world. So they're giving a bit of a picture of the ecosystem around what is it sitting beside and in relationship to. But it has its own mana, importantly. I also put the picture again of Ngā Toroirangi, the flagpole, who is credited in our stories anyway with bringing geothermal energy to Aotearoa. We're on the top here of the Horohoro geothermal field, the Maraias. And so again, our starting point for thinking about geothermal comes back to thinking about a kind of ancestral relationship for us, that Ngā Toroirangi was one of our ancestors. And it's right under the marae. So we've explored some of these. On the top left there is where the kind of extent of the Horohoro geothermal field, where the hottest bits are. We've looked at that. Our issue is we don't have the millions of dollars, part of the issue. We don't have the millions of dollars required for drilling that. That's not something we've pursued at this stage, but have looked into it. We have a micro hydro. There's actually 6 turbines now. But as you can see in the picture, it's still, and as you can see in that picture, the turbines are on the ground. Because again, like all of these things, it's great to have the starting point, but it doesn't just mean that you sail off with the butterflies and rainbows into the sunset. There's always implementation issues and repairs and maintenance issues. And so again, I'm trying to kind of just give you a very specific example of some of the issues to navigate through. So the reason it's not working at the moment is because we're having increasing numbers of flood events in our river. Upstream is a pine plantation, and pine needles come down and clog up the little turbines there. There's also silt that then comes down in the river and blocks the entrance to the microhydro, which all requires someone or some people to go and dig it out, clean them out and so on. We have had those people, but we're in a rural area, as you might have gathered from the pictures, which means people have to come out from town to be servicing these things. So these are the kinds of very on-the-ground practical issues that can then stall these sorts of activities. We also have an inverter, but when it is working, it tends to be putting that electricity into our national grid, and we then buy it back, which is not at all economic for us as a community. So we need a battery, but we don't have money to buy a battery. So these are all just kind of giving you a sense of the kind of range of things that can be impediments as well as facilitate these sorts of activities, and happy to get further into that if you like. So we're not opposed to batteries, which is important before this next slide, because the other thing that we do have in our area is lithium, which really only came to our attention when a green energy strategy was put out by the government, and there were maps and there were red dots of the countryside where lithium potential was, and there was a big red dot over Horohoro. And so since that time, actually the Lorax down there at the bottom was from an earlier campaign against gold mining in our area. Anyway, I won't digress on that, but I can talk about that further if anyone's interested. So we were approached by, and I regularly, as the Minerals Advisor, watch the minerals map that we have, the government handily provides, to see which kinds of applications are coming up. Because our process under our Crown Minerals Act is, actually there's just been an amendment to it, but the whole process essentially is driven by the Crown. They take the applications, provide the permits for companies. There is then a requirement for consultation with iwi, and hence we had contact from a company called Mineralogy, which actually comes from this whenua, from this land, Clive Palmer, who you will may be familiar with, as its a chairperson and fearless leader. So they have an outpost in New Zealand and contacted us about their permits, which we'd opposed several times, but had not had engagement with them. We'd requested that they come earlier, but anyway, you can see up on the top right, they've got quite large areas permitted for looking for lithium and other rare earth minerals. And this kind of, this sort of lithium where it's found does require open cast mining. And in my discussions with these geologists, they were quite firm at pointing out that the particular exploration they're doing at the moment isn't in what they deemed to be our territory, and sort of implied that therefore it's none of our business. But actually, all of these things with the waterways connecting as they do, the trucks, other equipment going across lands, certainly we have an interest in what's going on. So that's the situation with lithium. So it's an option, but not one that we had explored. And so they haven't pursued the idea of acquiring some sort of social license in this kind of case. They're very much about sort of, divide and rule tactic is probably what I would say. And what we can see is that many of you will be familiar with that, the demand for lithium is also projected to increase drastically as we shift to renewable energies. And we do need some batteries as we all buy our Tesla cars to drive into work and so on, other cars, other EV type vehicles. But we know that it is still better, and we can then debate that if you want in the Q&A. However, we haven't seen any firm steps to improve existing standards or reforming these sorts of old-fashioned mining laws and practices that we have. And we need those to go hand in hand with our green energy revolution, circular and regenerative practices, setting proper standards for reuse and recycling and actually meeting those standards, reducing demand. That imbalance in our essential relationships is still one of overconsumption for some of us. There are, of course, folks that aren't overconsuming. And centring those human rights, Indigenous rights, and rights of nature, I would say. At the moment, New Zealand doesn't have any companies that recycle batteries in New Zealand, and I think our household battery numbers, the figures are a little bit old, but only 0.2% of household batteries are repurposed or recycled. So this sort of, the consumption that underpins this idea is still not going to help us with the rebalancing that we need. So that's just one example of how we're navigating this and some of the values that play in our in our techniques for living well with others. But of course, Indigenous communities don't have all the solutions. We need other knowledge systems as well, and I think that's where, if we sort of reverse a little bit what Latour was saying in Down to Earth, yes, we do need Indigenous solutions, but we actually need other knowledge systems as well for us all to come together. Indigenous peoples aren't just saints. We're not just ecological natives. There's also these balances and rebalancing that goes on in communities. So I might just leave it there. Kia ora tātou.